So this week we're going to do a little bit of a catch-all. I know we kind of bounced around on a lot of topics last week. I'm getting a text that may mean a mic issue. Nope, good. We bounced around a lot the past couple weeks on a little bit of random topics. We're going to do that a little bit today, and I hope, if we can not ramble, I hope that we'll have time to just kind of take some questions and talk through anything you want to chat about. But I would say, like, ask us anytime. We like to talk about it. We'll tell you even more mistakes when it's not on film. But happy to share, kind of where we've been. Although, even as we were prepping for this one, I admitted, I'm like, man, the baby years seem a long time ago now. Like, it does. Man, it
Sort
does.
of, yeah, but it was also very fast.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. Heather gets mad at me when I tell her, like, I want to go fishing. I want to take the boys fishing. And I'm like, yeah, I've only got, like, 5 summers left with Parker.
He does the how many summers do you have left?
And Heather's like, stop.
No.
That is not allowed. That is unnecessary. But, the truth is, as much as it feels crazy in the little years, it does go quick. We want to maximize the time that we have with them. So today we're going to hit a couple random areas, from like picking up with the screen usage last week to talking through just teaching discernment of how they deal with the things that come into their life, whether good or bad, and how they think through voices worth listening to. And then we'll hit a little bit on just enjoying the time that we've got, and hopefully leave some time for questions. And we might even get in the mud and talk a little bit about school choices. Because I know looking out there today, I see a lot of people that don't have kids that aren't in school years yet, and now we've got a lot of options out there. So just talking
even if
through,
they are, we're all always tossing that around in our heads.
Yeah, mixing things up. But the end of last week, I feel like we got a little scattered talking about screen usage. So I just want to, go back to the end of that and kind of wrap it up, and also say, hey, there was some great stuff on Wednesday night. Did you bring the book?
I did.
For those of you who weren't or aren't in the Wednesday night class with Chris and Will, that was impressive.
I know.
They've been going over What Do I Say When? Which is a neat little book that has suggestions. It's much more well laid out than what we've talked through.
Yeah.
But honestly, it pairs well with some of the discussions we've had here of encouraging conversation with your kids. And they suggest a lot of topic conversations for different ages. So they did, they had a lot of good stuff on screen time and teaching discernment and questions to ask. As you think about that for your kids as they age. But again, to go back, like for us, I don't want to paint the picture that we are like no screen household.
That we think you should be.
Yeah, we watch plenty of TV, but for us, the roundup is we do it a lot of times as a family. Usually at least one good night a week, we will have like dinner together and watch a show or a movie. So like we're not anti-TV, but I'll just say for screen use, think about what you want to do. Think about how much time that they're in front of the screen. Watch for the impacts of that, both in what they're consuming and how much time they're spending on it. And, Wednesday night, Chris went over a lot of good questions to ask about, how to discern for them, teaching some discernment on what they watch and when you think you've gone too far in the screen time. And my encouragement, I think, I just want to give from our end is, for us, like, you can do it. Like, you can pull back on it if you decide you want to. I feel like there's a feeling sometimes when once you've gone down a road and you're like, my kids watch 2 hours of TV a day, that's just what they do. Like, they just scream and are upset if I take it away. It's a thing. I just want to encourage you. Like, you can make adjustments there. For us, the way that it worked well for us is we had to do a complete stop for a little bit to reset some things. And so that's where we talked about the TV-free summer. Like, we knew, okay, we're watching a little too much. Let's just stop for a window. And it did. We joked and read the Willy Wonka long Mike TV song. But it's true. It took about 2 weeks, and there was a lot of whining and asking. And then after 2 weeks, there was no more. Like, for us, it stopped. in that window. And then it gave us a chance to reset and come back. So
It allowed us to have conversations about, like, what are we treasuring? Are we treasuring, and we use that language a lot in our home because that's easily understandable, at least in some way, even for little kids. Like, are we treasuring Bluey over what mom is asking you to do? Are we treasuring our iPad, whatever it is we use, over your sibling? That language has been helpful for us. That we use that in the teeny tiny days as well.
yeah, and I think in terms of phones, the key indicator of how much they want phone use is going to be you, and how you self-regulate your own phone use. And I think my favorite part of this class has been standing up here watching you all react to each other when we talk about some things. Like, we saw a few, like last week talking about phone use. We saw a few.
The, like, secret nudges.
So look, it's a challenge for all of us, but just recognize that as they watch you and you think that phone is amazing and stare at it all the time, they're going to want it all the faster, right? We set a few parameters for ourselves. I think our favorite, passive-aggressive comment to each other is always like, "What you looking at?"
What that really means is get off of it. Pay attention
that's
to me.
like, it's unspoken. It's spoken now. We know the game. But like, check each other. How much you're doing that. We set a few parameters for ourselves and for our marriage, for that matter. Of, we try to eat dinner around the table as much as we can. Doesn't happen every night of the week, but we try to. That's a no phone spot for us. Like, it is, and we'll call each other out for that one. For us also, like, we made the decision early on, and we appreciate it. Like, there's no phone in the bed. So if we lay down for bed at night, like, we'll watch a show together, but nobody picks up their phone. Like, and that's another one we call out. But think about the self-regulation for you. Like, where do you need to curb that, recognizing that's also going to play out for them. Anything else there?
No.
All right, take it away. Sorry.
So, yeah, we talked about discernment a little bit. We hit on that a little bit last week. We wanted to spend a little bit more time there. And Chris talked about discernment, if you were able to be a part of that on Wednesday. I want to talk about discernment in what our kids read. This just happens to be like a passion of mine in curating what my kids read, and so I understand it is not everyone's jam, but I'm going to land here anyway for a little bit. So we love to read. We learned early on that we also need to teach discernment around what they're reading. When the pandemic first hit, our oldest was in second grade, and second grade tends to be like the reading explosion year, give or take a little bit. So at that point, he went from reading, little bitty books to chapter books. And we realized we did not have a lot of chapter books in our home. We had a whole lot of little bitty books. He was ready to read more. We didn't have much. The library was shut down. At that point, I don't think we could even do the curbside pickup service. And so I reached out to another mom who's a little bit ahead of us. I knew she had a whole lot of book resources in her home. And I said, hey, we need some books. Obviously, we're going to be home for a long time. Do you have any of these books? And I just rambled off for her some books that I kind of remembered or that Google told me would be good books for my, young kiddo. And she very graciously came back to me and said, yes, I do have those books. Are you aware of what's in some of those books? I'm like, no. At that point, I was more excited that he was reading, and I was less concerned about what he was reading. And so she pointed out, one book in particular. She's like, this book is kind of scary for a second grader. It's going to deal with these kind of themes. And I thought, oh, you're right, it does. I've never even thought about it. Now, of course, there are obvious things you don't want your kids to read about, but it was the first time I had really thought about that. And she did not know really until very recently that conversation catapulted me into a love for curating what my kids read that would forever shape me as their mom. And as a friend, I think, because I have a lot of conversations with ladies about books that our kids are reading. So where am I at? Yeah. All right. I spend a lot of time researching books for my kids, more time than I would be proud to admit to you. Sometimes I go down a long rabbit hole. But what I've discovered is that is really, for me, one of my favorite ways to build relationships with my kids. Paul talks a lot about communication, and Paul's very good at like on the go, let's go have an adventure and talk about things. I've been able to deepen my relationships with my kids through books, specifically through reading books together. So sometimes, just being practical, that looks like a family read aloud. We try, every school break that we have, we try to do a family read aloud together. In the summer, sometimes we'll do several, sometimes we'll do a series or whatever, and the kids could go back and tell you some of their favorite family read alouds. That's my favorite. Sometimes that's a read aloud with just one kid. If you have multiples, that gets really hard eventually, especially if you want them to go to bed and stop reading. Sometimes that's me pre-reading a book. I read a lot of kids' books, not a whole lot of grown-up books. And then I hand them the book. Hey, I read this. You're going to love this about it. Read this after your next one. It took some convincing over the years, but now they'll say, okay, yeah, I'll add that to my stack. Oh, thank you. My favorite, though, is when I hear that they're reading a book or I see that they're reading a book, maybe that they got at school and I haven't seen that, and I will secretly read it while they're reading. And then it's fun because I can come to them and say, hey, they'll tell me what chapter they're on or something, and I'll say, what do you think about this thing that happened? And they're like, what, you're reading it too? It's the best. It has opened up tons of conversations about things that I didn't know I needed to be talking to my kids about. Lots of themes that I did not think my kids were going to encounter in life, and they wouldn't in life if they didn't in books. But it lets me speak into that and open up conversations for our whole family. So there's something about stories, right? I really think that because of this grand story that God has created, we are a storied people. And there's something about stories and leveraging stories to get to the heart of our kids. Paul jokes that like all the big epic movies are just all the same story redone. Like all the Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, all those things are just repackaged. And honestly, I think that's because all the good stories are echoes of the greatest story, which is why it's most important that we point our kids to the greatest story, the Bible, as an overarching story from forever past to forever future. So on a practical level, I'm not telling you that you need to spend lots of time researching your kids' books. If you love it, go for it. It's really fun. But I realized early on that I could not continue to pre-read everything my kids were reading, because I did for a long time, and I wore myself out with it. And so I began looking for sources and for resources that I could access that would kind of do the work for me. I still pre-read as much as I can and read along with them. We do this with movies as well. We have some websites that we will utilize to research what exactly we're going to encounter. So Common Sense Media is a decent one. Used to be better, has changed a lot more liberal in their detail of what is in movies and books, and they don't have everything. Focus on the Family has one called Plugged In. That's a good movie review site. There are lots of smaller book review resource sites that I can point you to individually if you want to touch base, if that's something you'd be interested in. Also, I'm happy to share anything, if you have a book and your kid wants to read it or you want to read it with your family, you can check with me. I don't know everything. I know a lot of really great people that I check with too, so I'd be happy to do that. I do want to share with you, though, just some general guidelines that I'm using when I'm looking at books. And I know I'm deep into the reading rabbit hole, and this is what I love and where I live. So here are some general guidelines, and these are not end-all, be-all. If this has this, I will never let my kid read it. These are some guidelines for thinking about, is this appropriate for this kid, and how much do I need to speak in and come alongside? Number one, does this book directly dishonor the Lord or his people? That's an absolute no for me. If there are books that are speaking in an unredemptive way of Christianity and of the Lord, that's a no for me. Number two, does this book feature same-sex relationships or LGBTQ characters? I wish I didn't have to say this, but many / most of the new juvenile fiction series have characters that will at some point be involved in a same-sex relationship. You have to decide in your family, like, is this going to be off limits for my kid to encounter a book that has any characters like this, or is this something we're going to read with them and talk about? For my littler kids, it's an absolute no. There have been lots of books. This is probably the number one reason that I've had to pull books from my kids. Lots of books where you may get several books into a series and discover that this is now not only present in the storyline, but featured in the storyline. So you and your spouse talk about that. Number 3, does this book contain themes that are too mature for my kids? So that would be things like suicide, romantic relationships, family abandonment, death, mental health, addiction issues, even like family conflict. Sometimes family conflict, even in little bitty kids' books, is just junk. You know, you've got brothers and sisters treating each other super badly, kids being super disrespectful to their parents, parents being rude to their kids. Number 4, does this book glorify evil and wickedness? This is kind of the guideline for how we think about magic in books for us personally.
That's why Harry Potter was off limits.
We love Harry Potter.
Oh, okay. Just checking.
We love Harry Potter. No, but really in looking at magic in books, I'm like, what kind of magic are we talking about here? Are there like demonic things? Are we worshiping things? Is this evil that's glorified, or is this evil that's going to be defeated by good? Do what you want with that. Number 5, does this book's storyline lead to reconciliation and redemption? And all the books we're going to read to our kids will have flawed characters, and that's okay. Those are helpful things to be able to point out to our kids, but are we working toward, if there's family strife, is it going to be redeemed? Is the family going to reconcile? Things like that. I mentioned there have been lots of times that I've pulled books from my kids. That has been a thing that we've really had to ask them to trust us in and trust me in particular. They now know, for the most part, that they have to ask me before they read a new book. And I know that sounds really strict, but they have access at school to any book. I have walked through the juvenile section at our own public library and had to go talk to librarians about what I find, even on covers of books. So you'll see there will be things on covers of books that will clue you into this is problematic. You could probably guess some things you could see on covers.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So if you see a book at the library, will you go just take that to the librarian? Or, I hide the books. That's why I'm asking.
Don't hide the books. Don't hide the books. This is a whole rabbit hole. I have researched. The library is looking for every time the book is moved. So every time the book is moved, that tells them, tally, that book is interesting to somebody. And it will make it higher on their list of
You've tripped the algorithm.
I know. I know.
Okay,
Yeah.
put it top, out of eyesight,
Yeah.
Burn it. No.
Yeah. Now, you can move it. They're going to put it back. That's a whole other thing. But
So what do you do?
what I have worked to get to know the librarians, particularly the children's librarians. We did that by going to story time a lot when the kids were little, when I could, and making connections with the people that I see back there. And then there was one book in particular that I had to say, I don't understand why this is up here. And I never really got a great response to that. But I was coming at that from hey, we've had conversations before. We've built rapport before this. I'm not just, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but this is a book that I don't think is safe for kids. And they'll look into it, and they have books that they must put there. But
Yeah, and there's power in the collective and all that, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the awesome things about Buck Run, for us to seek to live in community. And we'll talk about that in school choice, and that, hey, if we're all doing this and having
Yeah.
conversations about what we see, and more
Yeah.
people come and say, not a fan of this.
The other thing around that is the more a book is checked out, the longer they'll keep it. So if there are books that you love and you're really happy that the library has, tell everybody else to check it out too, and they'll keep it. Yeah, so I've mentioned that our kids have to trust us when we ask them to put a book away. There was a series that Parker was in years ago. He was like 9 books into it. And one of the main characters became attracted to a same-sex character. And thankfully, he brought that to me. 9 books into a series, I'm not reviewing them anymore. He brought that to me. What do you think about this? Is it too much? I said, I think it's too much at this point. I had to put the whole thing away, which was a bummer. But we talked about how that honors the Lord when we do that.
And I think that to me is the takeaway of this, is like, for books on that front, for TV, for movies, the same thing. Like, have conversations, create a safe place on having the conversations. Like for us and our kids, it's like, hey, just want you to know, even super young, I don't want to scare you, but I want to scare you. Like, in 2nd grade, like, hey, if you are over at a friend's house or you're with a friend and they pull out their phone and you see something on there that you're like, I don't think I'm supposed to see that. Like, let's talk about it. We've had that happen, right? And it's the same with the books. Like, we want it to open up conversations when we get there. So, hey, we can have a conversation and we can talk about why our family is not going to let that character, that series, influence our heart and our lives by consuming that media. And like I said, it goes for books, TV, screens, anything like that. I think those questions that she read through could just as well be applied to movies easily. And we've had a few movies where we've had to turn off early on.
Yeah, sometimes you turn them off, sometimes you pause and say, whoa, did you notice that? What do we know is true about that?
Yeah.
Let's move on.
And we talked about this earlier, so I'm not gonna go in depth about it, but like, we also don't want to substitute good books and books about the Bible for the Bible. Like, just spend the time reading the Bible with your kid as well. And you don't have to dumb it down into every little thing all the time. Sometimes just practice reading it with them. Or, have them see you read it. Again, we talked about that early on, so not going to go back through there. And here's the thing. You've got 2 extremes up in front of you right now, with one who reads like an animal and one who reads like an animal as in, I read the Bible. That's about all. Not exactly the best model to follow, but just a full admission. Like, I don't read a ton. There were times in my life that I did, but I do rely on her a lot for the kids and having the conversations with them about what they're reading and encouraging it. And I make sure that I know I get up early, and that's when my Bible reading time is, and I try to make sure that they get to see me reading there, because I don't read a lot for fun.
Well, I'll say this has now transitioned to, like, as we move past the little years, the kids are like, Mom, what do you even look at to see if a book is any good for us? And so I can say, okay, come over here and look. I will open this website, and it will say, like, what are some, like, is there any language in here? Along the way, there will be words that you'll decide, I guess that's okay if they read that in a book. I trust them not to repeat it. And, I don't want that language in a book. How much romance can be in a book for even your teenage kid? So we'll show them, this is what this website says. This thing right here is a red flag to me. This is what's going to make me say no.
All right, we're going to wrap up.
Let's go.
She likes her reading.
I could hang there all day.
But the takeaway is, like, look, this is her thing. She loves it. If you have questions about books that are appropriate, please ask her. I would also say there are a ton of other parents and pastoral staff, other people that also read a ton, that you can just ask about these if you're not as into reading on your own and you want to check for resources. So ask the question. And with that, let's kind of dive in, very quickly and into the deep with school choice, because I think that's kind of where it goes next. Obviously, these days, there's a lot more options for schools for our kids, from homeschool to Christian schools right across the road to just a whole lot of public schools in the area, and the ability to potentially move from one public school to the other if you ask the right person in the right place. And so we wanted to just touch on it at least and give our take. And I'll just say this out of the gate, like, I have seen many godly kids come out of the public school system, and rebellious teens come out of homeschool families. I have also seen the complete opposite. And what I think our encouragement as we dive into this is really to just say, like, there's no perfect recipe for raising a godly kid. And our encouragement to you is to think through these things, ask some questions, but more importantly, just play a part in your kids' education. If that's homeschool and you want to do that and you're able to, that's fantastic. Think through that, to that. If your kid is like, well, not homeschool is not even an option for everybody. And if you want to send your kid to public school, then do it and find ways to be involved in what's going on with the school and ask a lot of questions. And in this, as we dive into this is another area that people have super, super strong feelings, right, about what you should do or what you shouldn't do. And, in areas like this where the Bible doesn't just explicitly lay out for us what we want to do, I think we all just have to urge a little caution on judgment of others and their decision in this and what is the quote-unquote right path. But instead, just encourage you to prayerfully consider what your options are, what you and your family want to do, and be involved in whatever that educational path is.
Yeah, so spoiler alert, we're not going to tell you how your kids should be educated because we are not locked into one opinion. And I don't know if we're going to get into this, but we do a little bit of everything currently. I do want to hit on some things that have become important to us regarding educating our kids. Can you tell 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lists? So we're going to keep going with that rhythm. So here are important reminders to us. Number 1, God mandates parents to faithfully raise our children in the wisdom and instruction of the Lord, teaching them to love God and others as they follow God's design for life. That was wordy. We still have to do it. No matter how we educate them, our job is the same. It is not going to be done for us by other people. Number 2, we must approach educational choices with a humble heart and out of a desire to honor the Lord, trusting Him to direct our paths. This means we must beware, like Paul said, of judging or assuming superiority over others because we feel led to make different choices. These choices will not be the same for every family. There are different fits for different families, and we have to guard against pride in fighting for what we choose. Number 3, we must remember that our school choice will not save our child. Psalm 3:8 says, salvation comes from the Lord. And so our job is the same as a parent. It's going to play out differently based on where they go to school or how they do school. And like Paul said, what we really have to keep in mind is it truly is a luxury for us in our culture that we even have choices around school. We all know that there are parts of the world where there are no choices at all, and anything is something and is wonderful. Like you said, within a mile, we have multiple private schools, public schools, and families that are doing school at their kitchen table or wherever every day. All of our jobs are the same, to disciple our kids. So different needs for different families. What we are going to choose for our family based on our needs and circumstances does not have to be the same as what you choose. Again, what's important is your engagement with your kids and in their education, no matter where it's at. So here's my last list, and then I'll stop it. Some questions that we ask ourselves when thinking through school choice. I really was working to distill this down into, I get wordy, into like a 10-minute thing. If I have to distill it down, what are the things I want to communicate? And these are the questions that I think it's important to ask ourselves in our marriage around school choice. Number 1, what is motivating our school choice? Are we motivated by things like comfort, convenience, simplicity, tradition, our peers' decisions? Are we motivated by fear? Are we motivated by laziness or control? Have we held up this particular model of school as an idol in our hearts? Number 2, what are our non-negotiables regarding our kids' education? So what will be the deal breakers for us? That means if you're sending them to public school, what are the things that are going to make you say, we're not doing this anymore, whatever it is. So what actually matters? Number 3, no matter the school choice, what is our plan as a family to intentionally encourage a biblical worldview and be the primary influence in our kids' lives? I don't have to tell you that if we send our kids to school, we give them away for most of the hours of their day. That has always been hard for me. You know, especially if you have a kid doing extracurriculars, you might find that you get a couple of hours at most with them in the day. And if we're not intentional, we'll find, I don't know that I had any meaningful conversations with my kid this week or studied the Bible any. Number 4, no matter the school choice, what is our responsibility as believers to the local kids and the local schools in our community? How will we encourage our kids to share the gospel with others?
So I think those are some good questions to ask, to think through. And our general takeaways on this would be just prayerfully think about these things, and whatever it is, like, get involved and be intentional. If you're homeschooling, there's a lot of different questions that you need to ask in terms of, like, how am I fostering friendships for my kid? What friendships am I fostering? What pieces of education am I making sure to hit? And recognizing that, I'm going to say this multiple times today, like, we can't shelter our kids to Jesus. Like, we can't hide them away and think that is what will for sure just make them wind up a godly adult. We can't think we're that prescriptive. 2, if you're doing Christian school or public school, I would say the overall takeaway, as we've talked to other parents who have adult kids who went through the public school system, I think there's a lot of things that you can pay attention to and be involved with. One of the coolest things, again, about the community of believers that we have here, there is someone from this church working in almost every school
A lot of them, yeah.
in the county. I don't know of any that we don't have somebody, be it a principal, a teacher, a guidance counselor, some in. So I want you to hear, you have an in every school in the county. Somebody may call me on 1 or 2 missing, but I think we've got them on all. So ask people questions, like figure out who teachers are in the school. Your teacher does have a monster influence on setting the tone in their classroom. There are some awesome, godly public school teachers here that plant seeds of the gospel in their classroom, even if it's not just explicitly stated everywhere. So pay attention to that. Think about it. Be involved in the school. And again, don't think that going to the Christian school makes you immune from all these discussions. It still matters who's there and what sort of education they're getting. But, there are ways to volunteer at any events. We have church members who are on different boards. We have some that sub a lot. That was one of the ways that I know Heather and Hannah and others get in, and they got to know the teachers. They get to know a lot of the teachers. It probably opens up more opportunity for them to think about who they can ask for their kid's teacher the next year. So there's all sorts of ways for you to still be involved in that education, even if it's not like just purely at home. And I think that's on both fronts. The other huge one is to pay attention to their friends. Have conversations, start asking about as they go to school. Make it normal when they're little to talk about their school day, what they're learning, who they're talking to, the ups and downs. There's lots of good ways to do that. We've varied over the years from expectations when we drive in and when we drive home of conversations that we're going to have, highs and lows of the day at the dinner table. Make that a part of your everyday, so you learn what those influences that are coming into them are. And with that, I said influences. Here, let me switch sides with you.
Okay.
I think let's tie kind of everything together we've talked about the past 2 to 3 weeks, about intake from screens, media, to school, and to friend groups. Let me just ask, when you think, go all the way back to the first week when we talked about authority versus influence in your kid's life, and how an acknowledgement over time when they're born, when they're, one of the babies in the room, you're controlling everything, right? You're authority on everything. And over time, you're teaching them to live their life on their own, right? You're slowly giving up that authority. They're gaining their own. And your piece in the puzzle becomes influence, right? Until they reach a point where the decision over how much influence you have in their life is up to them, right? Like, once they reach adulthood, the relationship that you have with them there's a joint piece to it, but they could call that off completely, right? And I'm not saying that to say that's where we are. Obviously, we're not. But just an acknowledgement that trajectory changes. So if you think about, as your kids get into, say, late elementary school, middle school, envision your kids there if they're not. What are, we'll say, the who and the what and the where are they being influenced? Give me some off the top of your head. Where are influences in their lives coming from? Elementary school, middle school.
Here.
So church, and we've got a lot of ways here. So at church, how do we have? Where are they influenced, and by who?
Community groups.
C groups, community groups. Where else? D groups. D groups. All the alphabet groups. Yeah, we got, the kids area.
Yep.
So Sunday school.
They're influenced by their friends and their teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Friends, adults, friends at church, and adults at church. And we'll come back to that one. All right, outside of church, where else? Who else? Friends.
Friends outside of church. Yeah.
School.
Sports,
Friends, yeah. Sports. And I think you can divide that up to say friends. And this is one I feel like gets forgotten, and it didn't really hit me last year until I taught a sporting event. Your coaches.
Well, even just acquaintances that aren't friends that they spend time, that they want to spend time with.
Want to spend.
But if they're on a sports team and there's people that they don't want to spend time with, they're still around.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say just other adults and kids. And I think you can put in that bin neighbors, or you're right. There's going to be some decision points over who they spend time with, and there's others that they can't escape, right? If there's a kid on a sports team or a kid at school that they may not escape.
We're doing only in-person influences right now?
Well, even like Chick-fil-A playground.
Yeah, there you go. I think that could fit in these bins, like out in the world,
Yeah.
those.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Those
what
Chick-fil-A
about
playgrounds.
What about media influences?
Their favorite YouTubers.
Yeah, so
Dude, perfect.
YouTube. What else?
Shows, games.
Shows. I'd say TV, general. I'd put on here social media, which is, a rabbit hole that goes a million places. Video games.
And we didn't say teachers, school teachers. Backing you up.
All right, teachers. And for Heather, we'll put books.
Yeah.
All right, so, you write them all out and you think, oh, family, and family. And I would say also from that, extended family.
Sometimes that's worse than the Chick-fil-A playground.
No comment. So yeah, if you put all out and you think, all right, if your kid's in elementary school and they're in middle school, there is a competition for influence, right, in their life. They're hearing a lot of voices. It's going to be from teachers, school friends, sports friends. We hope it's here at church, right? They're going to be hearing from C groups in the kids area, in discipleship groups, friends, other adults in the church. If you're on social media, TV, video games, all these things, they're going to be hearing from different people. You know, obviously there's people whose job now it is to be an influencer, right? And they are getting paid by companies or for their own profit to influence people. And so I say let's, rounding all this out for what our kids are facing in those areas, I would say a couple things. Like, one, I don't want you to think that, all right, here are all these things on the board. I need to manipulate them to take out all the negative influences and to only allow the godly influences. That's not possible, right? When you look at that board and you see like, well, I mean, I can scrub TV, social, video games. I can just wipe that off and we can say none of that, right? Like you can cut that one out. Now, if you've got public school time, you can't completely control who their friends are at school. They're going to have school influences that are not what you want them to be. So you could say, well, fine, we're homeschooling. Like, you can start wiping all these off if you want and try to control it. But the truth is, like what I said earlier, we can't shelter our kids to Jesus and just wipe all of the influences out that we don't want. Our piece in this is slowly... there are some of them when they're young that we may want to wipe out. I told you social media for me was like, no, we're just not even letting that one have a place yet because we want to slowly build them to a place where they can discern and handle that later in life, but they're not ready for it now. So where I think, am I off the camera?
You might be.
I probably am shouting into the dark. But, my encouragement would be this, that you think about the areas of influence in your kids' lives. And maybe you decide that you look at this holistically over the topics we've talked about. Maybe you say, okay, homeschooling is right for our kids because we're concerned with the friend group at school. We're concerned that we're not getting enough time with them to disciple them. Maybe you make that decision. Maybe you say, you know what, they have a great Christian friend group at public school. They're doing fantastic. I know the teachers. This is a great place for them to be. And you say, yeah, that's absolutely, there's lots of godly influence there. Or the negative influences that they're dealing with, we're able to have the conversations that we need to have at home and help them work through that. But maybe you look at, YouTube and TV and you're like, okay, I've not been paying enough attention to some of the negative influences that are coming in from that media. We need to recycle that and think through where this is coming. And I would just say where I think that we can often as parents kind of get in trouble is when we start dropping some of these important ones off and don't realize it. You'd hear from Will and from some of the other pastoral staff, and the research really shows this, as the older they get, this friends and other adults group at church matters enormously. There comes a time when the switch starts to flip where the influences that they're getting are starting to diminish from us as parents in those teen years, and they're really drawing from other adults and friends that they're listening to. So there's an outside piece here.
Yeah, that we already have in place so that when we're not the voice in that season that they want to listen to, they've got their D group leader,
Yeah, and I think, again, going back to like where I think we can fall off and not realize it is if just, imagine a place where your kid's in middle school and all of a sudden all the interests are starting to pile up, right? They're like, well, my friend's got a phone and I want to be on social media. A lot of the struggle with phones and screen time for me is that a lot of it can be done in secrecy. And you don't know what that friend group is. You don't know, maybe they're down some dark rabbit holes. And I'll just say, we've done C groups for, I don't know, a decade or more, and I'll freely admit, even friend groups in the church, when people fall into sin and major issues, often there's like an internet dark hole they went down for support for whatever direction they were going, or affirmation, and that's an issue in adults. Like, and I think kid-wise, it's the same challenge. But as they get into those years, imagine they're going to school. They've got a little social media use, so now, these outside influences are starting to play heavy as they do that a lot more. And then you get them on a sports team, and they're almost good enough to really be good. So you get the coaching. You start missing Wednesday night practices. You start missing some of the community group opportunities, and all of a sudden, what drops off the list is these start gaining, and we start losing these. And we're like, oh, well, we compromised. Now we can't make kids' night. And then it's Wednesday night church. We can't do D groups. And we start very easily and quietly not realizing that we start scratching off some of the godly influences in our kids' lives. And again, my takeaway is not that sports are bad. Our kids are in them. It's a good thing to get involved in, but just think about, as they age, where their influences are coming in. You can't control it all. We've got to teach them how to live and which voices to listen to. And I would just encourage you, I think one of the most awesome things about the way that our church is structuring a life as community of believers is that we're giving a lot of these opportunities for outside, positive, godly influences in our kids' lives. So find a way to take advantage of them. Protect them in the years where it gets hard, because the schedule is going to get more and more challenging over time. And foster these other adult relationships in the discipleship groups that they have opportunity for. And just kind of recognize, like, if you're cutting them, think about cumulative impacts here, right? Like, I'm teaching discernment here, but then I recognize I'm losing some of the godly influence I want in another area.
Or even at the risk of belaboring, like, we've been in a situation, are you wanting to switch back?
I'll switch back.
Okay.
It's
We've
like
been
a
in a
spot.
situation where we've had a sports thing that has conflicted with Wednesday nights. And so we've had to say, okay, if this kid doesn't come on Wednesday nights, where else do we prioritize? Because we're losing that. What are your non-negotiables as a family? We have sports non-negotiables, but that's been one we've had to contend with. Okay, moving on.
I think we're going to have to skip a section.
Let's do it.
No, we did talk way too much, but I think the last area we're going to hit in is, I think, one I see a lot of you do well anyway, but enjoy the years, have fun with them. Ask us questions about that, but find some ways to create routine memories. I think super valuable. We do little things like a lot of Sunday mornings. It's a routine for us. Like,
Don't tell it.
I play loud, crazy music every Sunday morning.
To wake the kids up.
To wake the kids, it happens. We have an 8-minute long heavy metal ballad.
Lots of heavy
That's our
metal on
cleanup
Sunday
song.
mornings.
It's called "Lay the Demon to Rest." It's by a guy I went to college with. Made it. It's a good song. Solid theology. Anyway, Hannah's like, "Who is this person?"
Who is this person?
Is grad school. It was
Oh,
grad
like,
school.
I don't remember anybody from our undergrad.
But anyway, lest you think we are a normal, calm household and the broken nose a few weeks ago wasn't like a sign, we crazy.
It's really just the norm. It's the norm.
But I would say, just have fun with them. I talk about going out in the outdoors and doing crazy stuff with them. One of the things that we have wanted to paint a gospel picture of our household is, like, there is joy in the relationship. Just like for us as believers, we're not just like looking for heaven. Like, the joy in a relationship with Christ is walking through the day-to-day crazy, right? And we want to mirror that with our kids. Like, hey, the joy of you having an obedient heart and trusting us and listening to us is that we get to do fun, awesome stuff together, whether that's going on crazy adventures, or we had the talk yesterday, or it's just the routine of working at our house.
Yeah.
of things that have to get done that, hey, we can still have fun doing that and have a good time. You know, I think the first all-night fishing trip for our kids on the boat was like 5 years old. Like, hey, if you listen to me, we could do crazy cool stuff. And my point is not to say go do that. My point is whatever your thing is, man, do it with them and have fun. You know, like whatever your interests are, your hobbies are that you as a family like doing, take them and do it and have a blast and talk along the way about the joy of that relationship with them. I'm going to kind of wrap us up, and we can have a few questions before we close out. But, you know, I would say we started off this class a long time ago, it feels like now,
So many months ago.
asking what are your parenting goals? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And we intentionally did not answer that question for you. Like, the point of this is not to do what Paul and Heather did. The point of this is to prayerfully consider, like, how you want to guide the little hearts that are in your household, how you want to steward their lives that in the time that you have with them. We highlighted a few of the biblical principles that are the guideposts for us as we do that. You know, our prayer is that this class just urged you to think about it, have conversations, and not be afraid to make adjustments or to feel unprepared in this. The Lord has given us all what we need to do this and do it well. With that, we got like 10 minutes left. We have a little bit of time for questions, unless
Okay.
you had anything to add.
No, that's good.
Good.
Thanks.
Anything we didn't cover that you're like, I wish you talked about?
We might
I
not
don't
have
think
an
we
answer.
intentionally avoided anything.
We'll find someone
but
that has an answer for you.
Yeah. There's so much stuff I was like, we could have talked about, but didn't. But
Yeah, this is we really hoped you would say something about this moment.
Okay, I'll ask a question. One of the things that I'm dealing with right now is that I'm not having obedience happily. So you've mentioned obedience right away, all the way, with a happy heart. Okay, so maybe my kids obey right away and all the way, and they do what I say, but they're not doing it happily. You know, I'm like, I'm gonna put the dishes away.
Right.
You know, like, where's the line of, they're doing it with a bad attitude, or they're just doing it because I asked them to, or they're doing it, but they're not doing it joyfully.
Yeah. That happy heart phrasing is a little bit of an oversimplification because, yeah, they're not going to say, I would love to clean my room. Of course I will do that for you, Mom. And I think, and you'll find, like, this will pay off as they're older. Even the other day, I asked one of our kids to do something, older than yours, you know, in that situation. I asked one of them to do something, and they went, okay. I was like, hang on. I want you to think about your heart and how you just responded to me. Like, maybe that wasn't a discipline moment, but it's a do-over. I want you to think about how you just responded to me. I asked you to do something that's helpful for our family. Let's try it again, and I want you to be careful with how you respond. Hey, can you do that thing for me? Yes, I will do it. I don't expect them to go, of course, you know, because
yeah. I would say also think long-term.
Yeah.
So, you know, instruction like that, you may not be able to do every single time, or
Right.
you're also just going to frustrate the life out of them. So picture it in the long term and think about, all right, if I ask for a task 10 times over the next 3 days, like what is my trajectory? Are they
characterized by grumbling.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then maybe have that as you kind of strategize and think about, like, okay, what am I going to address? What am I going to let go? Like, if they've been having an awful stretch where they're like throwing a fit at everything, then maybe you're going to say, well, okay, if you're going to just scream and throw a fit before you do what I ask, then we're going to have a discipline moment and a correction for that. If they're having a particularly awful stretch where they're throwing a fit at everything, and then you ask them to do something and they have an eye roll and then they go do it, maybe that time it's just a conversation like, hey,
Yeah.
we're making some progress
Some
here.
improvement here.
Still notice. So I think that try to look at the trajectory in the long term, and don't feel like, all right, if they make the slightest off face, like I need to address it every time. So yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I think about like how we respond to the Lord as well. Like we also would hope that we could respond in obedience with a joyful heart, maybe not a happy heart, but maybe an overall joyful heart to the Lord. And does he discipline us every time that we say, I'm still going to do this thing you've called me to do, but I don't want to do it? Like the Lord is patient and kind and merciful with us. And I think we can use judgment in how we exercise that with our kids. Does that help?
I think the last add I would have is also, and this is broader than I think your question, but know when to pull the other parent in for help on that. So like, especially if I'm seeing grumbling from the boys with Heather, like that's often when I need to jump in and give a hand with like, hey, your mom asked you to do that, so that mom's not always the one like towing the line on that.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
We have also, so there's been like a particular thing that we are trying to work with the kids. It's really, it's like, you know, you get in and they take their coat and shoes off in front of the door and you're like, oh my gosh. So we've been like intentionally working with that. So when I see them do it without being asked, I also am like, hey, thank you so much for obeying.
Make a big deal.
So it's not always me correcting.
Yeah.
But also being like, I really appreciate the way you did that without asking, and you did it joyfully. And so, because I don't want to feel like my kids are like they feel like I'm always correcting them.
Wow.
And just so when I recognize them doing something that I've asked them to do, I try to be like, you know, not make a party out of it, but like yesterday I gave a high five. You know, like
Yeah.
thanks for booking
Yeah,
my
we
way,
recognize
you know?
and praise
Well,
their obedience.
You know, that's kind of mine. I just told them if I trip over your shoes on the front door, I'm throwing them into the top of the closet where you can't reach them.
Good luck with that.
Lots of ways.
Lots of ways. No, that's a good question and good ad. Like find the way, find the success, find some success. Any others? Any book recommendations? Did you have
Always.
more?
Well, I just brought, in the beginning, we had talked about reading the Bible with our kids. And a lot of you have kids that are younger than ours and maybe are starting to read. As far as Bibles go, this is really random. I can't believe you brought that up and let me go here. Sometimes it's hard for them to open up like an ESV and go for it because they're going from easy reader books and then you're like, it's really important that you read the Bible. All of our kids had this version called the NIRV, New International, maybe Reader's Version, and it was we still liked the translation, but it was more kid-friendly reading, phonetically even. We liked that. I think all of our kids got one from grandparents when they were 5. We liked that up until they got their second grade Bible at church and they got their real ESV. We have also used, and I've showed, or at least talked about these before. We've used these Kaleidoscope Kids Bibles. I'll leave this up here if you want to look at it. These are issued, sometimes it's just one book, sometimes it's a collection of books, like if it's, epistles or something like that. These are pretty stinking close to what we actually read in our Bible, but they're much more understandable. They have good little pictures. They don't skip over sections. Like this is Daniel. It goes through Daniel. Honestly, these are really helpful for me as well when I'm like, I'm not really understanding, or we're going through a sermon series and I want to tune our kids into what they're about to hear. We may pre-read one of these knowing that they're going to hear that section in the sermon. Love these. Lots of other book recommendations, but don't skip these. Anything else? All right.
It's okay.
Well, we don't. Okay.
We read a lot all the time too, but the kaleidoscope, if you've heard the Dodo boxes,
Oh, yeah.
we have the kaleidoscope cards. And
Yeah?
in the morning they'll just put them in, Play-Doh.
We love 'em.
And just read through that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Great when I'm
Use them like an
not
audio book.
reading, they're just listening.
Yeah.
Even when they're playing Legos.
Yeah, I love that. Audiobooks for kids. we did not have, I'm not that old, but somehow I did not utilize audiobooks when our kids were little. So don't do that, because if you do, guess who the only person they want to hear read a book aloud is me.
And for the record, I cannot stay awake while that's happening, so that's a no
In
the
the car, on car rides.
That's a
I'm
negative.
turned around screaming in Paul's ear. Our kids will not listen to an audiobook, even if it has a good British accent. They won't do it. But yes, those are great. All right, why don't you pray us out? They might be sick of looking at us every Sunday morning.
You think so? Well, thank you all for hanging with us, and hope you enjoyed it. And again, reach out with any questions anytime to us. You'll hear more of the fault stories, like I said, when it's not on camera. But
we appreciate the grace you've extended to us in having these conversations in public out loud. We told you week one, like there's a lot of vulnerability in doing this. And so we never wanted to hold ourselves up as a standard, but an encouragement of like, these are the things we found that we needed to chat through over the years. We encourage you to do the same. Like, let's search the word and do it together well.
let me close this in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for this time that you've given us together to just talk about how to live in community and to point our children just towards you. I ask that you would give these parents in this room encouragement and just the energy and the enthusiasm to point their children towards you. And I thank you for all that you do for us. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.